Today we're going to talk about a certain Republican strategy backfiring ahead of 2024, and I interview Speaker Nancy Pelosi about her response to the Democrats' stellar election performance, the revelations about Mike Johnson's policy positions, and her relationship with Trump when the cameras were off. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. In the course of 24 hours, Republicans set themselves up for disaster as we head into 2024. Here's exactly how. So on Tuesday night, Democrats overperformed in races across the country, from Kentucky to Ohio to New Jersey, and even to some degree in Mississippi, just by virtue of keeping that gubernatorial race within a few points. But in Virginia, the election was a referendum on Glenn Youngkin's promised 15-week abortion ban if he was able to secure a Republican trifecta in that state. And he framed it as a compromise, which I'm not exactly sure how it's a compromise when one side says that you deserve the right to bodily autonomy and the other side says, no, you don't. And the compromise is that you still don't have bodily autonomy. That's that Republican logic hard at work. But that was the deal. And far from securing that trifecta, Republicans ended up losing both chambers of the state legislature, both the state Senate and the House of Delegates, meaning that Glenn Youngkin predicated this entire election on yet another abortion ban, and the people of his state rejected him loud and clear. And of course, we saw a similar result in Ohio, where the voters in that red state voted overwhelmingly to enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution, although Republicans are now immediately moving to undermine that process, which means we're ready to see a fight in the coming months. And then we've seen similar results across the country. You all remember Kansas, also in the 2022 midterms in California, Kentucky, Michigan, Montana, and Vermont. Also in 2022, the gubernatorial races in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where the Democratic candidates vowed to veto any abortion bans that were passed by their states' Republican legislatures. All of which is to say, this is a recurring theme in this country, even in the reddest of states, that voters overwhelmingly reject these attacks on reproductive rights. And so what happened next within the Republican Party would defy logic if I hadn't already stopped expecting anything logical to happen years ago. Within 24 hours of those results, a bunch of Republican primary candidates went on stage, were asked their positions on abortion, and this is what they had to say.
Well, I stand for a culture of life, and I understand that it's important that everyone gets a shot. They have been caught flat-footed on these referenda, and they have been losing the referenda. A lot of the people who are voting for the referenda are Republicans who would vote for a Republican candidate. So you got to understand how to do that. But let's just be clear. The Democrats have taken a position. They will not identify the point at which there should be any protection all the way up until birth. That is wrong, and we cannot stand for that.
When you look post-Roe, a wrong was made right. They took it out of the hands of unelected justices and they put it in the hands of the people. And now we're seeing states vote.
Well, I'm 100% pro-life. I have had 100% pro-life voting record. I would certainly, as President of the United States, have a 15-week national limit. I would challenge both Nikki and Ron to join me at a 15-week limit. It is in our nation's best interest, and frankly, I think it's unethical and immoral to allow for abortions up until the day of birth. We have an opportunity in this nation to stop that reckless behavior from states like California, New York, and Illinois. I'd go a step further. In my parents' plan, we start by talking about funding, block granting resources to crisis pregnancy centers.
It was my home state of Ohio, I'm upset about this, yesterday, that passed a constitutional amendment that now effectively codifies a right to abortion all the way up to the time of birth without parental consent. Why? It's back to that Republican culture of losing. The Republicans did not have an alternative amendment or vision on the table.
That was one day after voters turned out en masse, virtually because of the Republicans' proposed abortion bans. And then these people trotted themselves out on stage and advocated for the exact policy that, again, one day earlier lost them a raft of elections, even in red states. I mean, my God, it's like these people are trying to lose elections. And look, the reason is obvious. Their sole focus right now is on winning the Republican primary. And because the rest of the party has lunged so far to the right and brought their primary base to the far right with them, now the only way to emerge from a Republican primary is to tack to the far right too. And so, of course, they all do it. And then they're immediately saddled with the most toxic baggage possible heading into a general election. And yet, for that same reason that seriously just defies logic, they keep doing it. There's no desire to moderate their positions, even as it becomes an existential issue for them. And it really does go to show how, at their core, these people want minoritarian rule. There is no interest in serving the majority of Americans. There's not even an interest in serving their own constituency, who again made their stance on this issue clear. They are solely interested in imposing a wholly unpopular will onto Americans who have already said in every which way that they are not interested in what the GOP is selling. When I say these Republican officials are Christo-fascists, I'm not doing it because I think it sounds spooky in the same way that Republicans call Democrats Marxists and communists and socialists. I am saying it because they are Christian fundamentalists who are trying to impose their religious doctrine onto people who've already told them no. And there is nothing small d democratic about that. The GOP's branding as the pro-democracy party was nothing but a glossy veneer to hide their actual position, which is to force us into their Handmaid's Tale fever dream. And again, they won't moderate. They didn't after the Democrats won the House by the biggest midterm margin in modern U.S. history in 2018. They didn't after the Republicans lost the House, the Senate, and the White House in 2020. They didn't after the Republicans' big red wave was reduced to a 5-seat majority in the House in 2022. And they won't now, after losing a spate of elections from Ohio to Virginia to Kentucky in 2023. The extremism isn't a bug, it's a feature. It is the whole ballgame. And look, this is not to say that we've got everything in the bag, because after 2016, we should be absolutely clear-eyed about what can happen. It's more just to show you the danger of allowing this party to take power, a party that is so far right, so extreme, that they are wholly and completely unresponsive to the will of the people. Here's a preview of my interview with Speaker Pelosi.
When you have these Republicans who are suffering loss after loss after loss, largely owed to Dobbs and their position on abortion, why double down? Why triple down? I mean, even in this latest Republican debate, we had the vast majority of those candidates on stage advocate for a nationwide abortion ban. So why double and triple down on this issue?
Well, they're trying to win the primary. And in the primary, that's the place they have to be. But understand this about elections, which is the challenge that we have. They have endless money. They're endless money, endless. We don't have endless. We want to reduce the role of money in politics, but we'll get to that later. But the endless money, and that's about ban on abortion, guns, because that's where a lot of their big money comes. Fossil fuel industry to say no, we don't have to adjust for saving the planet, those kinds of things. And it's a democracy issue too. So we want to suppress the vote. And they want to win the primary, and that's the place to go among the active Republicans.
Yeah, I guess that's their kind of the catch-22 they're in. They have to win the primary. That's their first, second, and third priority. But then once they actually get out of the primary and into the general election, they're faced with an electorate who has told them in every which way, up and down, that they're not interested in the agenda that they're selling.
Well, and besides, is it what they believe, or is it just a political expedient?
Just to keep their jobs.
And if you give them examples of young women in a certain circumstance, what would if it were their daughter or their sister or their wife or whatever?
Of course. And they know, by the way, that if they go the way of Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or Mitt Romney, that they won't have a future in Republican politics after that. So, and to that point, the media has been falling over itself, basically trying to have painted Glenn Youngkin as a moderate because he wears sweater vests, right? And that's not dissimilar to how they painted Mike Johnson, despite his actual policies, that because he didn't appear outwardly as crazy, then they can continue painting him as moderate. In light of what we saw in this latest election cycle, where Glenn Youngkin was repudiated because of his policies, and in light of the revelations that we found out from Mike Johnson, do you think that the media will give up this relentless pursuit of the elusive moderate Republican that they're trying to will into existence?
Well, I don't know where they're on the strength of what are they making that proposal. Maybe they like to show a difference among some Republicans, one from the other. But it isn't, the facts do not bear it out. I mean, if we had not had the success we had in Virginia, this guy was on his way to a presidential campaign. I mean, he's such a weakling. He has money, so he bought into becoming the governor. And again, Virginia so far has been the only state that does not have an abortion ban, a ban on abortion. He wanted to make it complete, the only state in the South. And this was a big victory for us for that not to happen. But I don't see the vision. I don't see the knowledge. I don't see the strategic thinking about unifying our country in him. And I don't get it with the press. I don't know if it's about corporate America supporting ads and the rest of that. I'm very disappointed because the press is the freedom of the press is the protection of our democracy. In our First Amendment, the freedom of the press is the transparency of it all is so very, very important. But what's his name? He used to be in the White House, tried to diminish the press. Somehow or other, some of them have fallen into a pattern that isn't what our founders intended.
To watch the full interview with Speaker Pelosi, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also click the link on the screen for the audio version of this episode. And finally, to see more of my content, click the subscribe button on the screen as well.